So in this session, we want to look at how to add data into our objects, right? So we saw we had a class student and we were able to create three objects of that class. But right now the class is pretty useless, right? Like these objects don't have any data, they don't have any methods, as we had discussed in the previous sessions, that we want classes and objects so that we can have data and attributes corresponding to a class that are accessible to us through any of the objects, right? I would want that I should be able to assign an assignment to students, and each of these students should have this functionality, but I'll just write that functionality in the student class. So my student class will have that functionality, and then all the students will have that method available to them. Okay, so we will look at how to do that. And the first thing that I want to see is how can we add data into our objects, right? How can I get data into our objects? For example, my students should have roll numbers. So each of these students should have some roll number, they should have some name as well. So let's first talk about how can we achieve that. Okay, so in most of the programming languages, I'll be able to write something in my class to achieve this, to give name and roll number or whatever kind of data you want to give to your objects. You'll be able to do that by writing something in your class, right? So a typical C++, Java programming languages will allow you to do stuff like name, right? You should be able to give some name here, and you should be able to give some roll number here. But in case of Python, it's a little different, right? So when you write things like this, they don't really go to each and every object. And we'll come to this, what exactly happens when you write something here, when you write name is equal to something or roll number is equal to something in the class itself, right? So in Python, it's not this way. Things don't work this way. So for now, I'll leave my class as it is, that is with pass, right? So I'm not changing my class. My class stays the same. It does not have any data. But what you can do is, S1 currently does not have any data, right? Because we haven't added any data into it. If you want, you can add data to S1 by simply saying this. So now S1 has a data that is name. S2 and S3 does not have this data, right? But you have added it into S1. Don't worry, we will look at a way how we can add name, roll number to the class itself such that all of my objects will have it. For now, we are just adding it to individual objects. We are not able to add it to the class, so we are just adding it to the individual objects. Okay, so my S1 student has a name now. Similarly, if I want, I can add roll number, right? This I've added into S2. So S2 does not have a name, S1 does not have a roll number, S3 does not have anything. So let's add a name to S3, right? Let's say Rohan, and let's say the roll number is 13. Okay, so now S3 has both of these things. So if you want to access the data, you can just say s1.name and you get the data, right? If you say s3.name, then you get that particular object's data. What happens if you say s2.name? Right? That doesn't sound correct because S2 does not have a name. We haven't assigned a name to S2. So if you do this, you get an error that this object has no attribute name because we haven't added it, right? So far, the way we have seen how to add objects, how to add attributes to objects is individually. We can add it to individual objects. In the next session, we will look at how can we do it, how can we write code in a way that each of my object, each of my student will have these attributes. So we'll look at that. But for now, you haven't added anything into S2, so you haven't added name into S2, so S2 does not have a name yet. So it's giving you an error. Okay, perfect. Now there is one way using which you can see what all attributes a particular object has. So for example, you can see, so this is how you can see all the attributes in S1. So it's telling me that S1 has only one attribute, that is name, and that name is Ankush, right? So what about S2? Okay, so S2 has only roll number. What about S3? So S3 has name as well as roll number. So this is a dictionary that is available which contains all the attributes. Okay, it has all the attributes. So right now my objects have these data points. Now you can check if you want to add something. You already know how to add something into your student, right? Anything into your object. So you can just say dot whatever you want to add, whatever the key you want to give, and whatever the value you want to give. So the syntax generally is the object, whatever key you want to assign, and whatever value you want to put. So what this will do is this key value pair will get added into that particular dictionary. Okay, that particular dictionary. There are three more functions that will be useful to know. So your S1 has a has attribute function, right? So you can pass, does S1 has name attribute? Sorry, this is not the right syntax. So you have a function called has attribute to which you need to pass the object. So it takes two, has attribute function takes two arguments. First is the object in which you need to check, and the second is the key, the attribute that you want to check. So I want to check if S1 has name in it or not. So S1 has name. Right, so this is a function which tells you if this object has that particular attribute or not, right? So similarly, if I ask for S2, S2 does not have a name, so S2 is giving me that name is not there. Okay, perfect. So the way I'm able to check if there is an attribute, similarly you can get the attribute as well. So get attribute, sorry, the syntax is exactly the same. So get attribute takes an object and takes the attribute key that you want the value for. So it gives me what is the value corresponding to name. Now let's try to do get attribute on S2, right? So let's just copy this Perfect. So let's try for S2. So what do you think will happen here, right? So S1 had name, but S2 does not have a name. So what does that basically mean? So if you try to get attribute which does not exist, like we have seen previously, it's going to give you an error, right? So you're going to get an error that S2 does not have attribute name. So, but get attribute allows you to handle this a little more gracefully. So what you can do, you can basically call get attribute, and you can pass a third argument, which is the default value. That basically means you can pass a third argument here. Now, if this third argument will be required only if this is not present in S2. So if it is present in S2, you'll get that particular value. If the attribute is present, you'll get attribute's value. In case the attribute is not present, instead of getting this attribute error, you will be returned the third value. So you can pass a third value. So let's say I'm going to pass an empty string. So we get the empty string in return because S2 does not have name attribute in it. Now, if I try calling on S1, right? So what will happen is you'll get Ankush because S1 has name attribute. It does not need the third argument. It doesn't use the third argument. So you end up getting what is actually there in S1. Okay, so perfect. So basically you are able to get attribute, and so you could have done it by simply saying s1.name, right? But you can use the get attribute function as well. One good part is that it lets you handle the case when the attribute is not present a little more gracefully. It doesn't error out. It allows you to pass a third argument which can be used as the default value. Okay, perfect. So now we have has attribute and get attribute. We have another function that we can use, that is delete attribute. And as the name suggests, it will basically delete the attribute that you want to remove from a particular object. So now if you see, S1 does not have name in its dictionary. S1 does not have any other attribute as well. That's why the dictionary is empty now. So the only one attribute that was there has been deleted because I asked delete attribute function to remove name attribute from S1. So that has been removed. Okay. So we are able to check if attribute is there or not. We are able to get the attribute. We are able to delete the attribute. Right. So we are able to do all of these things. We already know how to set the attribute by simply saying s1.name is equals to something. So we don't really use these functions a lot, but we can use them whenever we need them. So like, it's very important that you understand what these functions are, right? In general, we will not require them a lot because our objects will have some standard attributes. We will not be assigning random attributes to our objects. In the next session, we will look at how can we make sure that any student that is created has a name and a roll number attribute. So I will not have to worry later whether my student object has a roll number or not. So that will be taken care once we go through the next session that we'll be discussing later on. Okay, so you have these three functions and you need to make sure that you understand how they work, and in the next session we will be able to see how we can make sure that there are few So now we know how we can check if the attribute is there or not. We know how to get an attribute. We know how to delete an attribute. In general, we'll not be using these functions a lot because we don't really need to check if the attribute is there or not. Why? Because most of our objects will have some standard attributes. We will make sure that a student, if it is created, it will have roll number and name. We will not have any student who does not have a roll number and name. So the has attribute will not be required that much. When we talk about get attribute, instead of doing get attribute, object and the name, we can always do s1.name, right? We can do object dot the attribute. So we'll be able to get data as well. In general, we will not be needed to delete attributes. So in general, we will not be using these functions a lot, but it's very important that we understand them well. In the next session, we will look at how we can make sure that if a student is created, it has the required attributes as we need in every student. Whatever data is required in every student, that should be there as soon as it is created. Okay, thank you.